when I was a kid, I was mesmerized by the Godzilla movies, and except for of course the one with the son of Godzilla, who was like a giant teddy bear. Oh, anyway, who blew smoke rings. But that, you know, this is just not going to work. This is just, I disagree. I'm canceling this whole thing. I'm deleting that really stupid review because, first of all, this person just blathers on and on and on. 25 minutes to talk about it. First of all, she's complaining about this movie that's being way too long. She's complaining that it's too long. And then she puts out a review that's fucking takes forever. Wow, you know, she and Peter Jackson must be like this. So I'm deleting that whole thing and putting a Godzilla preview. I mean, granted, she likes Godzilla, but you know, what does that have to do with Lord of the Rings, or rather, I should say, The Hobbit? Because, although, you know, it's hard to get the two, it's hard to not confuse those two, because Peter Jackson is making The Hobbit into another Lord of the Rings. That's the problem! The Hobbit isn't Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is a children's book. It's a children's book, you know, and it's not 3 books. It's 1 book. And, you know, it's like, okay, how does one take one little book, one little children's book? Okay, it's not a little children's book. It's a rather thick children's book, but it's still just 1 book, and it's a children's book. How does one take that and make it into 3 movies? Well, you bring in Peter Jackson. That's what you need to do if you want to make one little story into a huge epic. Yes, so anyway, I'm redoing the review that I did yesterday because I decided that it was too much like Peter Jackson and what Peter Jackson might do. In fact, it was a great illustration of what not to do when you do a movie review. That said, I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that I said yesterday. Peter Jackson, I have no problem with him. I can't even imagine them having anybody else doing The Hobbit but him, because I think it's a good idea to have consistency, you know, through the whole 2 trilogies. I'm sorry, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea of The Hobbit being a trilogy. How can they make that a trilogy? You know, this movie, Desolation of Smaug, ends at a really incredibly stupid point. You're like, what? And it's over. I mean, or rather, it's over and you're like, what? Because that's how it ends. And the reason that is because The Hobbit is not a trilogy. It's 1 book. So really there's no place that he could have ended it where it would have been any more jarring. So, and basically it's like what he does is he's got the climax of the story here, and in this second movie, The Desolation of Smaug, he goes to here, and that's the end of the movie. So movie 3, it's gonna be boom right here, you know, with the whole thing with Smaug, and then what? Where are we gonna go after that? For another 2 hours. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes if it's Peter Jackson. Really? Okay, so back, let me see if I can remember what I said yesterday, because I kind of want to say some of the things I said yesterday in this without making it being 25 minutes long. And taking the Godzilla preview out of the start of the review will be a help. That's 2 minutes and 51 seconds I don't have to have on this. Okay. I don't remember The Hobbit very well. It's been 100 million trillion years since I've read The Hobbit. Almost that long since I've seen the animated version of The Hobbit, which is all there was of The Hobbit until Peter Jackson and New Line Cinemas and New Zealand becoming Middle Earth. That was it. There was just the comic or the cartoon The Hobbit, which I recommend people see because I think that's probably a little more true to the book. It's actually a rather an unusual technique in animation too, so it's a good one to watch for just artistic reasons. But anyway, I don't recall aspects of Lord of the Rings being in The Hobbit. That I'm talking about J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. I don't recall Gandalf discovering that Sauron is alive and kicking in The Hobbit. I don't recall the ring coming into power in any imaginable way in The Hobbit. I don't remember mention of the Nine or the Nine gravitating towards Sauron. I don't remember that being in The Hobbit. I don't remember any of the stuff about a necromancer who is aka Sauron in The Hobbit. It's like Peter Jackson isn't so much making a movie based on The Hobbit as making a bridge between the children's book, The Hobbit, and Bilbo's adventure, and Lord of the Rings. He's making a little bridge. You know, they have to fit together in his mind. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, they have to fit together. This is the stuff that happens before Lord of the Rings. That's how he's putting this out. And I don't think that's right, because I think The Hobbit is a standalone story. It's stuff that happens, I'm trying to remember how many years before. It's 40 years, I think. Maybe it's 60. Anyway, I don't recall. But it's a significant chunk of time before Lord of the Rings, you know. And I'm sorry, I don't think Sauron should have a part in this story. I don't think he belongs. I don't think the rising of the amassing of his armies should be happening right now in Middle Earth. This is wrong. It jars me that this is happening and that they're showing this in The Hobbit. It doesn't belong in the story. So that's my first problem with this movie. And you know, I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I really love Middle Earth. Big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. He does write two-dimensional characters, which is difficult for me because I'm not really into comic book stories. And, you know, in Lord of the Rings, I had the same problem. Like, there's one scene where Saruman is talking about, oh, let's knock down all the trees over there to fuel the furnaces, and one of the orcs is going, yes, like, yes. It's really, you know, in real life, don't these guys have more to their lives than just how can we be really evil today? You know, in real life, evil characters have full lives, you know. They have other things they do besides being evil. In fact, they don't even think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as good, but not in J.R. Tolkien's world. At least not in the way the movies depict. And I suspect the books are the same way, but that's okay. It's just, that's the way it's written. But I have a problem with those kind of evil characters because, in my opinion, they're like pawns in a chess game. They don't serve any purpose but to, you know, they're there, but they might as well be like inanimate objects because they have really you never really find out what drives them. What is their, you know, motivation? Oh, we're just happy to be little minions, you know, and anyway, so that's just an overall quibble of this kind of story. But I love fantasy adventure fiction, which is kind of what this is. This is what I write when I do write, which I haven't written forever. Okay, so too many orcs. That's my biggest complaint about both this trilogy and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Too many orcs. And overdone. Hugely overdone. And how come there's never any nice ones? You know, you notice that? They're all evil. Every one of them. They're all evil. Really? In a whole population of a species, there's not one orc among them that's like, you know, guys, I don't think this is very nice. Of course they'd tear them apart, wouldn't they? But couldn't we even have a scene where we have one orc that's just, you know, feels kind of his conscience is bothering him, and he's not really all with the rest of them, because in reality they're not all going to be agreeing with everything, right? There's always got to be an exception in reality. Okay, I've strayed off again. Okay, too many orcs. You know, when I watched Lord of the Rings in the theater, and I did probably see all three of those movies at least 4 or 5 times in the theater, it was okay, you know, but when I got them home and I have them in my movie collection, I don't watch them very much because they're too long. And then when I do watch them, I fast forward through all the shit that I don't like, and that would be all the orc scenes. which is too bad because most of the orc scenes include Saruman, and there's another character that, you know, he turns evil, but what is his motivation? He does have a motivation, but in the movies we don't really get to see that very well. So, okay, back to The Hobbit. and Peter Jackson and how he drags things out. It's like, oh, here's a scene that's going to gross out the audience, so let's make this as long as we possibly can and as gross as we possibly can. Let's overdo it as much as we can. Or the scene where they're, you know, there's... It's like, okay, when you have a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, you have a movie that's too long. The first thing you do when you have a movie that's that long is you go through and you cut out the crap. You cut out the non-essentials, you know? There's a lot of Legolas fighting in this movie. Really? Do we need to see so much of Legolas fighting? We've seen all his moves before. Maybe there's one or two new moves that are interesting, but it's like, okay, we've seen this. We've seen him do that. We've seen him do that. We've seen him do that. Maybe we can cut a little bit of that. We have Smaug the dragon inside the mountain, and he's really, really cool. And, you know, we want to see him, and we want to hear him and all these things, but really, there's a lot of scenes where he's just slithering around. Slithering here, slithering there, slithering up here, slithering down there. Maybe we can cut just a few of the slithers and get a few minutes less time in this movie. You know, I swear, it's like, really? We don't need to see every single move that Smaug makes. The other thing, he does talk, which is something I was kind of hoping that they wouldn't do, because they do that in the animation. Smaug talks in the animation, but in the animation it works because Smaug is a cartoon. You know, and he talks in the books, and it's a children's book. But Peter Jackson isn't making these movies like a children's book. You know, and along comes a talking dragon. I was kind of hoping that we would do something different. Like you can hear him talking, but it's like telepathy. You know, Bilbo hears him talking in his head, but you don't actually see the dragon's mouth moving while he's forming words, you know. They didn't do that. They make the dragon talk. And that's okay, because it is true to the story, but it was kind of a disappointment to me, because I think the dragon was very, very cool, and when he starts talking, it's like, oh, okay, he's talking. To me, that's right up there with having talking horses, you know? Okay. Anyway, it's a magical creature. I suppose it makes more sense, I suppose, than a talking horse, but Shadowfax doesn't talk, you know? Okay, but he talks, and they get the most amazingly cool voice to do it, so, and it's good, but again, too much dragon, too much slithering. You know, I wouldn't cut a single line that Smaug says. He's very cool. And a lot of headshots, keep the headshots, but we don't need to see every move the dragon makes. So that's another quibble. Peter Jackson's King Kong, this movie reminded me of King Kong, because it's so long. I wanted to love King Kong. I really did. But I don't even own it. I watched it once in the theater, and that was enough because it was so long. There's another one. It was like 40 minutes too long. And it's like a good example of what I'm saying about Peter Jackson. If there's something that's grossing the audience out, he'll make it go on as long as possible, and he'll try to get it as gross as he possibly can. Like the bug scene in King Kong. I'm like, oh really? You know, do we really have to keep... Are we done yet? I kept thinking, can we be done with the stupid bugs? That's like the spider scene in The Hobbit. It would not end. It just would not end. And it's like, really? You know, I remember the spider scene from the book. It's not that long. And the children of Shelob, they don't ever say it, but these little spiders, or big spiders, in this movie are actually the offspring of Shelob from Lord of the Rings. It just keeps going and going and going, and the scene gets longer and longer and longer, and I'm like, this is just gross. And it's you know, the spiders capture the dwarves. I don't want to say too much. I don't want this to be spoilers. Well, let's just say it just goes too long. And then another scene that reminded me of King Kong, of course, was the river, the White Rapids, where the dwarves and everybody are going down the White Rapids in the river. it's like the scene in King Kong where they're being swept up in this stampede of dinosaurs, downhill stampede of terrified dinosaurs. Miraculously, they're managing not to be trampled as they're being swept along, and you think it's over. You think, oh gosh, they got away, and then suddenly they're caught up again in the stampede, and on and on and on it goes. Same thing with this. It's like, okay, they're in the water, they're going down the rapids. All this shit is happening. We're having more orcs, more and more orcs. Each time you see an orc, it's more ugly than the last one that you saw. That's another thing. Really? You know, it's like, can we make these people be as disgusting as possible, as hideous and repulsive as possible? In reality, okay, they used to be elves, right? Why would they... I'm sorry, I have a hard time with this. Why are they so hideous? Why are they so repulsive? You know, just because they're evil doesn't mean they have to be butt ugly. In my opinion, this is like people put ugly and evil together. You know, it's a stereotype. They put ugly old witches, ugly equals evil, everything evil is ugly, whatever, good is beautiful. It's a stereotype, and it's an old stereotype. It's like, just because they're evil doesn't mean they have to be hideous. Can be ugly, I suppose. They're orcs. You know, they're birthed out of the ground. They're not going to be gorgeous, but really? Some of them are so hideous. It's like, really? And that's Peter Jackson, and everything has to be so extreme with him, or incredibly long and dragged out. We have way too much spider scene. We have way too much river scene. Okay, they're going down the river. 20 minutes later, where are they? Oh, I'm sorry, they're still going down the river. It's like, okay. I'm trying to think if I have any other thing. You know, I actually like the movie. I know it sounds like I hate this movie. I give it 3 stars. It's not my favorite of the Middle-earth movies, but it's a middle movie. It's hard to make a trilogy. It's hard to make the second movie in a trilogy, which it shouldn't be in the first place. I think The Hobbit should have been a 2-movie. Should have been 2 movies. I think it could have been a really good 2-movie long whatever, and cut half the shit, and it would have been very well done. But instead we have Peter Jackson at the helm, and everything is just going to take fucking forever. I liked the dragon. I thought the characters weren't as... There wasn't as much interaction with the personalities of the characters as I wanted there to be. I don't think they explain very well some of the things that happen, you know. Anyway, I would give it 3 stars. I think it's something that any Middle-earth fan would want to see, but I don't really think it's that great of a movie. I was disappointed. You know, I'm sorry, but it's not Lord of the Rings. You made it into Lord of the Rings. You're trying to make Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson. It's not Lord of the Rings. It's something completely different. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit for his kids. It's a children's book. I think it should have been made as a movie more in the spirit of a children's book. In the first installment, we see them singing and throwing the plates. That's a silly scene, but that captured the spirit of The Hobbit more than anything I have seen in the second movie. It's a children's book. The talking dragon, Smaug, the fact that he talks, it wouldn't be so jarring if it was more like what it's supposed to be, a children's book. You have what seems like a serious movie, and suddenly the dragon is talking and moving its mouth while it talks. Seems a little out of place because it's not coming across like it's supposed to. It's a children's book. Smaug is a character in a children's book. You know, and the other thing that I found frustrating is the fact that the orcs are so overdone. It's like every time, you know, you're starting to feel like you're really there and it's a real world. Suddenly you have these extremely overdone characters that are like something from a comic strip. That's the orcs. They're so fucking overdone. They're not real. They don't seem real. And they just pull, to me, they pull me out of getting into the movie because I'm not thinking about what's happening in the scene. I'm thinking about, really? That's just You know, okay, first we have the pale orc, and now this time we have another guy who's even uglier, and he's blind in one eye because the pale orc apparently wasn't ugly enough. We had to have a guy who's even uglier. You know, it's like, really? They did the same thing with Lord of the Rings. We had every installment had an orc that was even uglier than the last bad orc, you know? So anyway, this is, if I don't end this, is going to be another 25-minute review, so I'm going to end it, but this is what I think of The Hobbit. It was visually beautiful. They all are. It's filmed in New Zealand. It's a good movie. It's a good movie. It just needed to be 40 minutes shorter, and there needs to, and I would, it goes too long. That's all I can say. If you can try to imagine this movie compacted, you would see there's a good movie in there screaming to get out. Really. There's a good movie in there somewhere, and if they could have just, you know, kind of like when you have a sculpture and you're chipping away at all the loose mud to find the beautiful the beautiful shape inside. The beautiful shape is inside, and you can kind of sort of see it, but the guy left all the chunks, a lot of the riffraff is still there. It needed to be chipped away, and it wasn't. So it kind of feels like a half-completed sculpture. How's that for an analogy? So that's my review. If you've been watching, thank you. Bye.